On the wall of the world's most famous museum, there is a gap. 4 iron hooks holding nothing. For one Monday morning in August, the most valuable painting on Earth was simply gone, and for 2 years, almost no one had any idea where it was. This is the Louvre, in Paris, the largest museum in the world. Inside its walls hang some of the greatest works ever made. But in 1911, one painting was not yet the icon it is today. She hung quietly in a room called the Salon Carré, a small portrait, barely larger than a sheet of paper, painted centuries earlier by an Italian master, Leonardo da Vinci. Art lovers knew her well, but to most of the world, she was simply one masterpiece among thousands. That was about to change forever. Among the many workers who passed through the Louvre was a quiet Italian glazier named Vincenzo Peruggia. He had worked inside the museum, building protective glass cases for its most valuable paintings. One of those cases had been built for the small portrait in the Salon Carré. He knew her frame. He knew her weight. He knew exactly how she was mounted to the wall. And he knew something else, something the museum's guards did not fully understand themselves. On Sunday nights, the Louvre closed its doors, and on Mondays, it stayed shut for routine cleaning. For a full day, its halls stood almost empty. On the night of the 20th of August, 1911, Peruggia entered the museum, dressed as one of its own workers. He simply did not leave. He found a small storage closet deep inside the museum and waited there through the night, alone in the dark, surrounded by silence. By morning, the corridors outside were empty. He walked to the Salon Carré, lifted the small portrait from its 4 iron hooks, and carried her into a stairwell. There, out of sight, he broke open the frame and the protective glass case, the very case he himself had built. He wrapped the painting in his worker's smock and tucked it under his arm. Then he simply walked toward the nearest exit, like any other employee finishing a shift. There is one detail that almost undid the entire plan. The door he chose was locked from the inside, and its handle had gone missing days earlier. For a moment, the most audacious art theft in history nearly ended in a hallway, over a broken doorknob. A plumber working nearby noticed him struggling and simply opened the door for him. Peruggia thanked him, stepped outside into the Paris morning, and disappeared into the city. No alarm sounded. No guard gave chase. The Mona Lisa was gone, and for an entire day, nobody at the Louvre even noticed. On Tuesday morning, a painter named Louis Béroux arrived at the museum, hoping to sketch the famous portrait. He found only the wall, 4 bare hooks, and nothing else. At first, he assumed the painting had been taken away to be photographed. A guard was asked to check, and the truth began to spread through the museum like ice water. The Mona Lisa was missing. Within hours, the Louvre was sealed. Every entrance was searched. Every worker was questioned. The museum closed its doors to the public for an entire week, an unprecedented step for an institution that had never faced anything like this before. News of the theft spread across France and then across the world. Crowds gathered outside the museum, simply to stare at the empty space on the wall where she once hung. Newspapers ran the story on their front pages, day after day. The French police were placed under enormous pressure to find her, and find her quickly. Detectives searched everywhere. They fingerprinted the frame. They questioned staff, art dealers, known criminals. Suspicion soon fell on the art world itself. A young poet named Guillaume Apollinaire had once employed a secretary who had stolen small artifacts from the Louvre in the past. Apollinaire was arrested and briefly jailed. And in the course of the investigation, his friend, a young Spanish painter, was brought in for questioning too. His name was Pablo Picasso. Both men were eventually released. Neither had anything to do with the crime. But the case had grown so strange, so consuming, that even some of the most famous artists in Paris found themselves under suspicion. Weeks passed, then months. Detectives followed lead after lead and found nothing. The Mona Lisa had vanished as completely as if she had simply stepped out of her frame and walked away. And through all of it, the man who had taken her was never seriously suspected. Vincenzo Peruggia kept the painting close, hidden inside a specially built trunk with a false bottom, in the small Paris apartment where he lived. For nearly 2 years, he simply waited. Police had once visited his lodgings as part of a general sweep of former Louvre employees. They found nothing unusual and moved on. The most famous painting on earth sat quietly beneath his bed, while the rest of the world searched everywhere but there. Some investigators later came to believe he had never planned to sell the painting quickly at all. That patience, more than anything else, was what made the theft succeed. There is one theory, told and retold over the years, though never proven, that before he vanished with the original, a forger produced several exact copies, later sold to wealthy collectors abroad, each one believing they had secretly purchased the real Mona Lisa. No evidence has ever confirmed it, but the story has never entirely gone away. In December of 1913, more than 2 years after the theft, an art dealer in Florence, Italy, received an unusual letter. The writer signed himself only as Leonardo and claimed to have the missing Mona Lisa in his possession. He said he wanted to return her to Italy, the homeland of the man who painted her. The dealer, a man named Alfredo Geri, arranged to meet him. Perugia arrived carrying the painting himself, wrapped in cloth, inside the false-bottom trunk he had built for exactly this purpose. Geri brought in the director of the Uffizi Gallery to examine it. They compared it against the Louvre's own catalog markings on the back of the panel. There was no doubt. After 2 years, the Mona Lisa had resurfaced. The two men thanked Perugia, told him they needed time to arrange the details, and quietly contacted the police. He was arrested at his hotel room shortly after. When questioned, Perugia gave a simple explanation. He believed the painting belonged in Italy, taken by France generations earlier, and he wanted, in his words, to bring her home. It was not entirely true. Leonardo da Vinci had brought the painting to France himself, centuries before, as a guest of the French king. But the story struck a chord across Italy all the same. When Perugia stood trial, crowds outside the courthouse treated him less like a criminal and more like a patriot. He was sentenced to just over a year in prison. He would serve only a fraction of that before his release. Before returning to France, the Mona Lisa was put on display across Italy, in Florence, in Rome, in Milan. Enormous crowds came to see her, in cities that had never once expected to host her. In January of 1914, she finally returned to the Louvre, to the same room, and very nearly the same wall, from which she had vanished. But something had changed forever. Before the theft, the Mona Lisa had been respected, admired by those who knew art. After it, she was famous, not just in France, but everywhere. The empty space on that wall, photographed and printed in newspapers around the world, had done more to make her a global icon than centuries of quiet admiration ever had. The theft that was meant to take her away had instead made her immortal. Vincenzo Perugia went on to marry and to live a quiet life, largely out of the public eye. He served briefly in the First World War and eventually settled back into ordinary life in France, the very country he claimed to have wronged. He died years later, remembered by history less as a criminal and more as an eccentric footnote to one of the strangest crimes ever committed. And yet questions remain, even now, more than a century later. Was he truly acting alone, or did someone help plan what he could never have arranged by himself? Were there truly forged copies, sold quietly to collectors who never learned the truth? And perhaps strangest of all, how did the most heavily guarded painting in the world sit beneath one man's bed for 2 years, in the very city where everyone was looking for her? The case was closed, the painting recovered, the thief identified and tried. By every official measure, the mystery was solved. And yet, in an odd way, the true story of the Mona Lisa's disappearance was never really about who took her. It was about how easily she could vanish from the most watched room in the world, and how long she could stay hidden in plain sight. Today, millions of visitors stand before her every year, behind reinforced glass under constant watch. Few of them know that the reason she is protected so carefully, admired so widely, and recognized so instantly is bound up in 4 empty hooks on a wall, and the quiet Italian glazier, who once believed he was bringing her home,